The lobby of Rourke Dominion was never short of men who knew how to straighten a tie. The moment Sienna Rourke stepped off the elevator, cream blazer, dark eyes, the kind of composure that came from owning the building. Every director in the atrium found a reason to stand taller. Smiles appeared from nowhere. Postures corrected themselves like compass needles finding north. Then the digital display board above the reception desk flickered, glitched, and froze mid-scroll. Wrong room numbers, wrong schedule, last week's welcome message bleeding through like a ghost. A man crouched beneath the panel toolbox open at his feet. He glanced up at the board, then sideways at the row of suited men frozen mid-smile and said, perfectly calm, "Not a technical error. I think it just saw Ms. Rourke and short-circuited, same as everybody else in this lobby." The atrium laughed. Even Sienna laughed genuinely unexpectedly. Then the man closed his toolbox, gave her a single polite nod and walked away. No lingering, no angled smile, no attempt to extend the moment into something more. Sienna stood there still, almost smiling, watching him go. That was the part she couldn't explain. If this is the kind of story that stays with you, hit subscribe and stick around. There's more where this came from. Sienna Rourke had built her reputation on reading people fast. At 34, she ran Rourke Dominion with the kind of precision that made board members nervous and investors quietly grateful. The company touched real estate, hospitality, and green infrastructure, three industries that rewarded patience and punished sentiment. Sienna had neither the time nor the appetite for sentiment. She had learned early that in rooms where everyone wanted something from you, the safest posture was to want nothing back. Men pursued her constantly, not her the portfolio. The Penthouse shares the hotel equity, the name that opened doors in 3 cities. They dressed it up in dinner invitations and project proposals and well-timed compliments delivered in glass-walled conference rooms. But the calculation behind each approach was always the same. Sienna had stopped being surprised by it. She had simply stopped responding to it. What she had not stopped was noticing. Nolan Brooks had been on staff for 11 days when the lobby already knew his name. He was a facilities technician, the kind of job that made you invisible in a building like Rourke Dominion, where visibility was currency, and currency was everything. He wore a gray uniform, carried a scuffed metal toolbox, and had a laugh that arrived before his explanations did. When the mailroom printer jammed on a Monday morning and 3 interns stood around it looking personally offended, Nolan walked in, gave the machine one firm press on the side panel, and said the printer was just staging a protest against Mondays like the rest of them. The jam cleared. The interns laughed. The morning moved on. That was how he operated. Not with effort, not with performance, just with a particular ease that made the air around him lighter without calling attention to itself. He was a black man raising an 8-year-old daughter named Kira on a single income in a city that charged too much for everything. He was never late, he never complained, and he left every day at exactly 5:15. It was a Tuesday when Sienna first saw Kira. She had taken the back corridor to the east wing, a route she used when she wanted to move through the building without triggering the usual parade of people who needed 5 minutes of her time. She passed the secondary lobby just before 5:30 and noticed a small girl sitting on the bench near the service entrance, backpack in her lap, shoes swinging above the floor. The girl was doing homework. Diane, the front desk associate, leaned over the desk and asked if she was bored waiting. Kira shook her head without looking up. "Dad tells jokes on the way home," she said simply. "So I like waiting." Sienna slowed. She did not stop. She kept walking and she did not look back. But the image stayed with her. A child who measured time not by how long it took, but by what came at the end of it. An 8-year-old who had a reason to look forward to the drive home. She thought about that on the elevator up to the 32nd floor. She thought about the man who had made her laugh in a lobby full of men competing to do exactly that, and then walked away without pressing the advantage. She thought about the fact that she could name every director who had sent her flowers in the last year, and not one of them had ever made her genuinely smile before 10 in the morning. Nolan Brooks had done it in under 40 seconds, and he hadn't even been trying. The morning of the investor walkthrough, the main lobby display system decided to have a crisis. It started small. A room number transposed a time listed an hour early. Then it escalated. The board cycled through 3 different schedules, simultaneously flashed a welcome message from a charity luncheon held 6 days prior, and at one point displayed the catering order for that same event in 36-point font directly above the reception desk. The walkthrough was 40 minutes out. 6 institutional investors were already in the building. The facilities manager appeared in the atrium looking like a man who had just been told the building was on fire, but was not allowed to say so out loud. He made 2 calls. The second one reached Nolan. Nolan arrived with his toolbox and no visible urgency. He set the box down, crouched in front of the display panel, and pulled the access cover without ceremony. Around him, 3 junior staff members hovered with questions he hadn't answered yet. The front desk associate refreshed the scheduling system on her computer with the focused desperation of someone trying to will a different outcome into existence. Nolan glanced at the board, which had just cycled back to the catering menu. "Honestly," he said, not looking up from the wiring, "if this board is trying to tell us the salmon was under-ordered, that's a facilities issue and a catering issue, and I only get paid for one of them." 2 of the hovering staff members laughed despite themselves. The front desk associate exhaled for the first time in 4 minutes. He worked quickly and without commentary after that. The humor had done what it was supposed to do, bought everyone in the room 30 seconds of oxygen. Now he just fixed the problem. Rerouted the display controller, cleared the corrupted scheduling cache, ran a manual sync. The board reset cleanly. Correct rooms, correct times. No catering menus. Elapsed time, 9 minutes. Sienna walked in at minute 10. She scanned the lobby, confirmed the board was functioning, and looked for whoever had fixed it. Her assistant pointed toward Nolan, who was latching his toolbox closed and giving the facilities manager a brief verbal summary of what had failed and why. Sienna crossed the lobby. "Thank you," she said. "Good timing." Nolan looked up. Something in his expression registered her presence without reacting to it. Not indifference, not performance, just a man finishing a task and acknowledging a person speaking to him. "Happy to help. The system's stable now. I'd recommend a firmware update before the end of the week. The scheduler module is running an old version, and it'll happen again. I'll have someone schedule it. I can do it Thursday if the boardroom's clear before 9. I'll confirm with facilities." That was the exchange. Transactional, professional, complete. He nodded once, picked up his toolbox, and turned toward the service corridor. Every other man in that lobby had been watching her since she walked in, adjusting, hoping, positioning. Nolan Brooks had just told her about a firmware update and offered a Thursday morning slot. She almost smiled again. She went to meet her investors. Sienna was not a woman who acted on impulse. Every decision she made passed through a filter of evidence and consequence before it reached action. So she told herself she was being practical when she asked HR to add Nolan to the building safety audit team. The audit needed a facilities technician with working knowledge of the electrical and HVAC systems. Nolan had demonstrated both competence and composure under pressure. It was a reasonable staffing decision. She filed it that way in her mind and moved on. What she noticed over the following 2 weeks had nothing to do with the audit. She noticed that when a custodial staff member knocked over a full cup of coffee in front of her floor manager, Nolan glanced up from his work order clipboard and said the floor was just trying to get its caffeine before the morning rush. The floor manager's expression softened. The custodial worker stopped looking like she wanted to disappear. The moment dissolved, instead of calcifying into something that would follow the woman for the rest of her shift. She noticed that when a first-week intern dropped an entire folder of printed reports in the main corridor, scattering pages across 20 feet of polished concrete, Nolan crouched down and started collecting them without being asked, and told the intern that paper documents had been staging workplace rebellions since the invention of the stapler. And it wasn't personal. She noticed that he made people feel seen without making them feel watched, that he diffused things without diminishing them, that the humor was never at anyone's expense, it was always offered as a way out, a small mercy dressed as a joke. And she noticed that none of it was ever directed at her. Not cold, not rude. When their paths crossed on the audit, he was professional, thorough, and easy to work with. But he kept a particular distance with her that he did not keep with anyone else. A calibrated courtesy that felt less like professionalism and more like a decision. Benedict Shaw noticed, too. Rourke, Dominion's senior advisor, had been with the company for 9 years, long enough to consider himself indispensable. He requested a copy of Nolan's full personnel file through HR on a Tuesday afternoon and said nothing about it to Sienna. What he said to her face was delivered over coffee in her corner office on a Wednesday morning, framed as concern. "Men like that are worth paying attention to," Benedict said. "Not because they're aggressive, because they're not. The approach is the point, the self-deprecation, the humor, the whole approachable routine. It reads as harmless. That's what makes it effective." Sienna looked at him over the rim of her cup. He fixed the display board and filed a clean safety report. "He also makes you laugh," Benedict said, "which is more than most people in this building can claim." He left it there. No accusation, just a door left open with a specific kind of draft coming through it. Sienna did not walk through the door, but she felt it. And for the first time, she found herself wondering not just who Nolan Brooks was, but what had made him build a wall that careful, that consistent, and that quiet. The thing about Nolan Brooks was that he was present everywhere and nowhere at the same time. He showed up. He did the work. He made the room easier to be in. And then he was gone back to the next task, the next corridor, the next system that needed attention. He did not linger. He did not follow up on conversations that had no operational purpose. He declined 2 lunch invitations from women on the administrative floor with enough warmth that neither woman felt rejected so much as gently redirected. Sienna began taking the longer route through the building more often. Not obviously, not in a way she would have been comfortable explaining. She told herself it was because she needed to stay connected to the operational side of the company. This was not entirely untrue, but it was not entirely the reason either. What she found each time was a man who treated every person in the building with the same uncomplicated decency: the security guard arguing with a broken badge reader, the delivery driver who had come to the wrong entrance, the junior analyst who had clearly been crying in the stairwell and was trying to look like she hadn't been. Nolan moved through the building like someone who had decided at some point that the people other people overlooked were worth the most attention. He just never let it become anything more than that. The friction arrived publicly on a Thursday. A routine safety check had brought Nolan into a conference room where Adrian Bell was wrapping up a project meeting. Adrian was Rourke Dominion's director of development, polished, well-connected, and accustomed to being the most impressive person in whatever room he occupied. He had sent Sienna orchids twice in the past year. Adrian watched Nolan check the emergency lighting panel near the door and said loudly enough for the remaining people in the room to hear, "Didn't realize facilities was branching out into executive entertainment. Good to know we have options." A few people laughed uncertainly. Nolan finished logging the panel check, closed his clipboard, and said without looking up, "If the company ever adds a comedy budget line, I'll submit an invoice. Until then, I'll stick to making sure the lights work." The room laughed more genuinely this time. Adrian smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. Sienna had been standing near the corridor entrance reviewing something on her phone. She had not been meant to hear it. She heard all of it. What stayed with her was not the exchange itself, but the moment after, the look of a man who had learned to deflect things so smoothly that most people never noticed he was deflecting anything at all. She thought about Kira on the bench, saying she liked waiting because of the jokes on the drive home. She thought about what it cost a person to be the one who made everything lighter for everyone else. She had not asked him yet, but she was going to. It was nearly 8 o'clock when Sienna found him. She had stayed late to review the Henderson project proposal, and the 32nd floor had emptied out around her the way it always did after 7, quietly, gradually, until the only sounds were the climate control system and the distant hum of the city below the glass. She took the elevator down to check something in the East Wing conference room and found the door propped open, the overhead lights at half power, and Nolan on a stepladder replacing a ballast in the ceiling fixture above the main table. He heard her come in. He didn't climb down. "I can come back," Sienna said. I've got about 4 minutes left on this. You're welcome to the room. She stayed. She set her folder on the table and then said what she had been carrying around for 2 weeks. Why do you always use a joke to leave a conversation? He didn't answer immediately. He finished seating the ballast, checked the connection, and climbed down one rung before he spoke. Because a joke is clean. People laugh the moment closes, everybody moves on. Nobody's holding anything afterward. And if you didn't use a joke, he stepped off the ladder and looked at her directly for the first time in the conversation. Then people might hold something, and that gets complicated. Complicated how? He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. He picked up the packaging from the replacement ballast and folded it once precisely before he spoke again. I had a situation at my last job. A woman I worked with. I thought we were becoming something real. I was helping her through some things, nothing dramatic, just being present when she needed someone to talk to. I thought that's what you did when you cared about someone. He paused. When her department got caught in an internal audit, something serious financial irregularities, she needed someone to redirect the attention. I was easy to redirect it to. She had my messages, took them out of context, reframed them, made me look unstable, made it look like I'd been pursuing her and she'd been managing it. He said it without bitterness. That was the part that landed hardest, not the content, but the flatness of it. Like a fact he had processed so many times it had worn smooth. I was terminated. The story followed me. And Kira, he stopped. Reset. She was 7 years old and kids were telling her that her dad was someone to be afraid of. Sienna said nothing. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me, Nolan said. I'm telling you because you asked a direct question and you deserve a direct answer. He picked up his stepladder and folded it closed. The jokes aren't about you. They're just the safest way I know to be decent to people without giving anyone anything that can be used later. He looked at her once more, not with distance, but with something more careful than distance. The look of a man being honest because he'd decided it was the only thing left worth being. I don't think you're like that, he said quietly, for whatever that's worth. Then he picked up his toolbox and his ladder and walked to the door. Good night, Ms. Rourke. He left. Sienna stood in the half-lit conference room alone with the hum of the new ballast settling into the ceiling above her and thought about a company she had never heard of called Helix Foods and whether her own family's name was somewhere in its history. Sienna did not go through official channels. Not yet. She pulled the Helix Foods file herself through an archived investment database her father had built before he handed the company to her. It took 3 evenings and 2 calls to a forensic accountant she trusted implicitly. What she found sat in her chest like something cold and deliberate. Helix Foods had appeared in Rourke Dominion's indirect investment portfolio 7 years ago, a mid-tier food production company flagged for strong regional growth. The flag had come from Benedict Shaw. The position had been held for 3 years, quietly exited when Helix began attracting regulatory attention. No public connection, no paper trail that pointed directly to Rourke. Clean in the way that things are clean when someone has been careful. The internal misconduct case that ended Nolan's employment at Helix had been filed 4 months before Rourke Dominion exited the position. Sienna sat with that for a long time. She brought it to Benedict the next morning, framed as a question rather than an accusation. She asked him what he remembered about the Helix exit. Benedict's response was immediate and practiced. The exit had been purely financial. Helix's margins were compressing. The growth story had stalled. He said it the way a man says something he has rehearsed to himself enough times that it no longer requires thought. Then he placed a folder on her desk. Before this goes further, he said, I think you should look at this. The folder contained a printed personnel complaint filed at Helix Foods. The complainant was listed as Maya Renner. The subject was Nolan Brooks. The language described a pattern of unwanted contact, escalating messages, and a hostile response to rejection. Attached were 3 printed emails purportedly from Nolan's work account, the last of which contained language angry enough to make Sienna's jaw tighten. I had HR pull this when I first heard his name, Benedict said. I didn't want to bring it to you without something concrete. I'm bringing it now because you're starting to dig into things that could damage this company's reputation. and I need you to understand what kind of man you're digging on behalf of." Sienna looked at the file. She looked at the emails. She did not say anything for a long moment. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'll review it." Benedict left. She noticed as he did that he closed the door behind him, something he did not usually do. 2 days later, Benedict quietly revoked her access to a section of the archived compliance records, citing a routine security protocol review. He sent the notice through the legal department rather than telling her directly. Sienna received it as a standard memo, read it twice, and filed it without responding. She did not tell anyone what she had noticed, but she did not forget it either. The company anniversary event happened that same week. Adrian Bell had organized the program. Midway through the informal portion, he called Nolan to the front with the energy of a man who thought he was being charming, told the room they had a real talent in the facilities department, and asked him to tell a few jokes for the group. Nolan delivered 3 minutes of clean, self-deprecating humor that landed well. The room laughed. Adrian looked satisfied. Afterward, Nolan found a quiet moment near the service entrance where Sienna happened to be standing. He did not look angry. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "I don't mind making people laugh," he said. "I mind being the entertainment at someone else's party. There's a difference between a man who's funny and a man who gets brought out to perform." Sienna looked at him. "I know the difference," she said. He nodded once. Then Kira appeared at the side entrance brought by a neighbor for the last hour of the event, and Nolan's entire bearing shifted. Not relief exactly, something quieter, like a man remembering what the day was actually for. Kira tugged his sleeve and asked if there were any of the small sandwiches left. Nolan told her there were and steered her toward the food table with one hand on her shoulder, and the tiredness in him went somewhere else, at least for now. Sienna watched them go and made a decision. The request Sienna filed with the internal legal team on a Monday morning was simple and specific. Reopen the Helix Foods Compliance Archive and cross-reference any personnel actions filed during the 18 months prior to Rourke Dominion's portfolio exit. By Wednesday, Benedict knew about it. She could tell by the way he arrived at her office that afternoon, not his usual unhurried entry. This time he knocked and came in almost simultaneously, already talking before he reached the chair across from her desk. "I need you to pause the Helix review," he said. "I haven't asked for your input on it yet," Sienna said. "You're going to want it before this goes further." He set a single printed page on her desk. This came through a contact at Helix's former legal team. It was flagged during the original misconduct investigation and excluded from the formal record on procedural grounds. "I've been holding it because I didn't think it would become relevant." Sienna picked up the page. It was an email, sent from Nolan Brooks's Helix Foods account to Maya Renner, dated 11 days after the internal audit had been announced. The language was not ambiguous. It began with accusations moved into something that read as desperation and ended with 2 sentences that, taken plainly, constituted a threat. She read it twice. She set it down. "Where did this come from?" "Helix Legal. Archived but never formally submitted because the case was considered closed." "Why are you bringing it to me now?" Benedict's expression was measured. "Because you are a week away from potentially exposing this company to significant reputational liability on behalf of a man whose full history you do not have. I am doing my job." He left her with the page. Sienna found Nolan in the basement electrical room an hour later. She showed him the email without preamble. She held it out and waited. He read it. His face went through something she could not name. Not guilt, not performance of innocence. Something older and heavier than both. "I didn't write that," he said. "The account is yours. The account was mine. I haven't had access to a Helix server in 4 years. He handed the page back. "I know how this looks. I know what you're weighing right now." He looked at her steadily. "I also know that I've been in this exact position before, where the document exists, and my word is the only thing on the other side of it. And I know how that math works out." He reached into his shirt pocket and set his keycard on the shelf beside him. "I'm not going to ask you to choose between a piece of paper and a man you've known for 6 weeks. That's not a fair thing to ask anyone." He picked up his toolbox. But I'm not going to stand in a building where my daughter's name is becoming part of a story again. I won't do that to her twice. He walked to the door. Nolan. His name came out before she decided to say it. He stopped. He didn't turn around. I don't think you wrote it, she said. He was quiet for a moment. That's kind of you, he said, and then he walked out. The lobby was at half capacity when he crossed it. A few people looked up. Diane watched him reach the main doors and stopped pretending to type. Nobody said anything. Nobody made a joke. The lobby felt the absence of something it hadn't known it had until it was gone. Something that had made Monday mornings survivable and bad days shorter, and the distance between the 32nd floor and the basement feels slightly less absolute. Sienna stood at the elevator bank and watched the main doors close behind him. Around her, 3 men who had sent her flowers smoothed their ties and waited to see what she would do next. The building noticed first. Not in any dramatic way, it was subtler than that. The kind of absence that reveals itself slowly. The way a room feels different after something essential is moved, and you can't immediately identify what's wrong, only that something is. The Monday after Nolan left, the elevator jammed for 4 minutes with 6 people inside. Someone fixed it eventually, but the energy in the car when it opened was jagged in a way it wouldn't have been before. The custodial staff member who spilled a full recycling bin in the second-floor corridor had nobody to defuse the moment, and the floor manager's response left her in tears in the bathroom for 20 minutes. A first-year analyst delivered the wrong presentation deck to the wrong room and spent the rest of the afternoon convinced she was going to be fired. Small things. The kind of things that happened in every office building every day. The kind of things that Nolan Brooks had been quietly, consistently, and without fanfare making bearable. Sienna noticed all of it. She noticed it the way you notice a sound you never registered until it stopped. She began the investigation on her own terms and told no one. The first thing she confirmed was the server access log. She had her forensic accountant file a formal evidence request through Helix Foods' former legal administrator, the same channel she had used to pull the investment records. The log showed every access point connected to Nolan's former credentials during his employment period. The threatening email Benedict had handed her had been sent from a terminal in the Helix Legal Department's internal server cluster. Nolan had never had clearance to that cluster. His access permissions had been limited to the facility's management system and the general staff portal. He could not have sent it from that terminal. Not without credentials he was never issued. The second thing she found was the disciplinary record itself. She requested the original signed copy from Helix's archived HR files through the same third-party legal channel. When it arrived, she compared the signature on the authorization line to Benedict Shaw's signature on 3 internal Rourke Dominion documents from the same year. They matched. Benedict had signed off on the closure of Nolan's case at Helix Foods, a company in which Rourke Dominion held an indirect investment position, a company Benedict had personally flagged for inclusion in the portfolio, a case that had been closed quickly, with one man's career destroyed and one woman relocated to a different branch at a salary increase that appeared nowhere in the standard compensation records. The third thing she found was Maya Renner's transfer documentation. The approval signature on that, too, was Benedict's. Sienna sat with the full picture for one evening. She did not call anyone. She sat in her office with the city laid out below the glass and thought about a man who had stood in her basement electrical room and said he wouldn't ask her to choose between a document and his word because he already knew how that math worked out. She thought about what it meant that within her own company, inside a structure she had inherited and built and believed she understood, someone had manufactured a lie that destroyed a person's life. And the machinery had worked so smoothly that even she had almost believed it. The crisis was not just that Nolan had been wronged. The crisis was that her name was on the building. She picked up the phone and called her legal team at 9:47 in the evening. She told them to clear the next morning's schedule and prepare for a full internal disclosure proceeding. Then she found the address of a small repair shop on the east side of the city and wrote it down on a piece of paper. The repair shop was narrow and smelled like solder and machine oil. Sienna arrived at 10 in the morning in a plain coat, no driver, no assistant. She carried a manila folder and nothing else. Through the front window, she could see Nolan at a workbench replacing a control board in what looked like an industrial timer unit. The shop owner, an older man who barely looked up, pointed her toward the back when she came in. Nolan heard her footsteps and turned. He looked at her for a moment, then back at the board in his hands. "If you're here about a lighting contract, I'm not taking corporate clients right now." The joke landed flat, and he knew it. He set the board down. "I'm not here about a contract," Sienna said. She placed the folder on the workbench. He opened it without being asked. She stood back and let him read. She did not summarize or guide him through it. She let the documents speak in the order she had arranged them. The server access log first, then the original disciplinary record with Benedict's signature, then Maya Renner's transfer approval, then the salary discrepancy, then the timeline that placed Benedict at the center of every decision that had mattered. Nolan read slowly. He turned each page with the same deliberateness he brought to everything. Nothing rushed, nothing performed. When he reached the last page, he stayed with it for a long moment, and Sienna watched something move through him that was not quite relief and not quite grief. Something that had been held under pressure for a long time finally finding room to shift. He closed the folder. "You could have sent this through legal," he said. "I could have," she said. "I wanted to bring it myself." "Why?" She looked at him directly. "Because the company I run was part of what happened to you, not intentionally. But the infrastructure was there and someone used it, and I needed you to hear that from me, not from a letter on Rourke Dominion letterhead." He nodded slowly. "Your name is on the building," he said, not as an accusation, almost as a fact he was still arranging. "Yes," she said, "and that means something. It has to mean something." The full staff meeting was held 3 days later. Sienna presented the findings without softening them. Benedict Shaw was present. Adrian Bell was present. The entire senior leadership team sat alongside a representative from the Legal Oversight Board. She walked through the evidence methodically without theater. When she reached the fabricated email and the forged disciplinary authorization, Benedict attempted to reframe it. He said the documentation had been gathered in good faith. He said Sienna's judgment had been compromised by personal feeling. He said that a man who made himself likable to powerful women was a pattern worth examining, that charm was its own form of manipulation. Sienna let him finish. Then she said, "A man who makes people laugh is not automatically running a strategy. Sometimes he's just someone who decided that making things easier for the people around him was worth doing. What's worth examining is why that made him a target." She turned to the legal board representative and confirmed the formal record was being captured. Benedict Shaw was terminated effective immediately pending a full legal investigation. The case was referred to an external regulatory body for review of the Helix Foods conduct. Maya Renner was summoned to clarify her role in the original misconduct filing. Then Sienna turned to the footage her team had pulled from the company archive, the anniversary event, Adrian Bell at the microphone, Nolan standing at the front of the room while the room laughed on cue. She played 30 seconds of it and asked the meeting, without raising her voice, whether this was the kind of leadership Rourke Dominion intended to model going forward. Adrian did not speak during the rest of the meeting. He did not look at Sienna when it was over. He was removed from his director position before the end of the week and placed under formal performance review. And every person in that room understood without needing it explained that the era of using powerless people as sport had a cost attached to it now. Rourke Dominion issued a formal written apology to Nolan Brooks. His personnel record was cleared. The company established an internal employee protection protocol, a structured process for investigating misconduct claims before any employment action could be taken. It was not enough to give back 4 years. Sienna knew that. But it was built on the right foundation, and she intended to make sure it held. 3 months later, Rourke Dominion launched a vocational re-entry program for single parents and workers who had lost employment due to wrongful termination or internal misconduct. It was not a press release initiative. There was no ribbon cutting, no business publication photographer. It was a practical thing, funded, staffed, and structured to produce outcomes rather than optics. Nolan was invited to serve as an independent technical consultant on the facilities and infrastructure side. The offer came through the company's operations director, not through Sienna. It was a contracted position with a market rate, a defined scope, and no obligation attached to it beyond the work itself. He accepted. His first day back at Rourke Dominion was a Tuesday morning in early spring. He came through the main entrance with a consultant's badge and his same scuffed toolbox, and the lobby received him the way lobbies receive people who belong in them, without ceremony, without the particular quality of attention that signals something unusual is happening. Kira came after school. She sat on the same bench by the secondary lobby, backpack in her lap, shoes swinging above the floor. Diane brought her a cup of apple juice without being asked and sat with her for a few minutes between calls. "I owe your dad an apology," Diane said quietly. "I heard things, and I didn't ask enough questions." Kira considered this with the seriousness of a child who had learned to take words at their actual weight. "He says everybody believes wrong things sometimes," she said. "The important part is what you do after." When Nolan came to collect Kira at the end of the afternoon, Diane stood and said simply, "I'm sorry, Nolan. I should have known better." Nolan looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "You're here now. That's the part that counts." He meant it. That was the thing about Nolan Brooks. He was not performing grace. He simply had it in the specific and unglamorous form that comes from having survived something that could have made a person smaller and choosing repeatedly not to let it. Sienna found them in the lobby on her way out. She had a 7 o'clock dinner she was already running late for, and she stopped anyway. Kira was showing Nolan something in her notebook, a drawing. He was studying it with complete attention the way he studied everything, as though whatever was in front of him was the only thing that required consideration at that moment. Sienna stopped a few feet away. Nolan looked up. Something in his expression was different from every previous version of it she had cataloged. Not professional courtesy, not careful distance, not humor deployed as a buffer. Just a man at the end of a Tuesday standing in a lobby with his daughter, and no particular reason to manage the moment into something other than what it was. "Good meeting?" he asked. "Productive," she said. "You..." "Same." A pause. "Kira wants to know if the building has a roof." Sienna looked at Kira, who was watching her with frank curiosity. "It does," she said. "Good view. She'd like to see it sometime." "That can be arranged." Kira smiled and went back to her notebook. Sienna looked at Nolan. "Still keeping your distance?" He considered the question with the same seriousness he gave everything. Then he glanced at Kira at the lobby around them at the main doors, where the late afternoon light was coming through the glass in long, warm panels. "I still want the quiet life," he said. "I've just been reconsidering whether quiet has to mean alone." Sienna held his gaze for a moment. Then she smiled, the real one, the one that had appeared exactly twice in this lobby before tonight. "I'll walk out with you," she said. She did. All three of them pushed through the main doors together into the early evening, and the lobby settled back into its ordinary self behind them, a little warmer than it had been before, and entirely unaware of how much it had cost to get there. There's something this story keeps coming back to, the idea that real love doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send flowers to make an impression, or adjust its tie when you walk into the room. Sometimes it shows up in a gray uniform, fixes what's broken, makes the people around it feel less alone, and asks for nothing in return. Nolan didn't pursue Sienna because he had nothing to prove. He had already learned the hard way that the most dangerous thing a person can do is offer their heart in a place that doesn't know its value. And Sienna didn't choose him because he was impressive. She chose him because he was honest in a world that had been performing for her since the day she inherited her last name. If that kind of story speaks to you, the quiet ones, the ones about people who survive hard things and come out generous on the other side, subscribe and stay a while. A new story drops every week, and every one of them is built around the same belief that the most extraordinary thing a person can do is remain good when the world has given them every reason not to.